Officer Ryan Carter thought it was just another routine stop. A black driver, an old car, nothing out of the ordinary. But within minutes, his entire world would turn upside down. It was supposed to be routine, a slow night in Chicago. The streets were quiet, the air thick with humidity. Dim streetlights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows on the pavement. His patrol car rolled steadily down the road, his fingers drumming against the steering wheel. 3 years on the force had sharpened his instincts. He knew the type of people that cause trouble. He could spot them a mile away. Then he saw it. An old, beat-up sedan creeping toward an intersection up ahead. The kind of car that didn't belong in this neighborhood, at least not at this hour. Carter watched as the driver barely slowed down for the stop sign before rolling through. Figures. His jaw tightened as he flicked on the patrol lights. Red and blue flashed across the dark street. The car hesitated for just a second before pulling over to the curb. Carter exhaled, resting his hand near his holster as he watched the vehicle. He let the moment stretch, just long enough to remind the driver who was in control. No sudden movements, no excuses, just obedience. Then finally, he opened his door and stepped out. Carter approached the car with slow, measured steps. The night was quiet, only the distant hum of the city filling the air. He kept one hand near his holster, the other adjusting his belt. The sedan sat still, engine idling softly. No movement inside. He knocked on the window, harder than necessary. After a brief pause, the window rolled down smoothly. The driver, a black man in his late 40s, looked up at him. He had tired eyes, a calm expression, and a face that gave nothing away. His dark jacket was slightly wrinkled, his jeans well worn, but clean. License and registration. The man nodded, moving slowly. Too slowly for Carter's liking. His hands didn't shake. His breathing was steady. No nervous fidgeting. He didn't even ask why he had been pulled over. Just followed orders, like he had done this before. Carter's eyes narrowed as the glove compartment popped open. The man retrieved his wallet, pulled out his driver's license and registration, and handed them over in one smooth motion. Carter barely glanced at them before looking back at the driver. "You know why I pulled you over?" The man met his gaze. His voice was steady, measured. "Rolling stop?" Carter nodded. "Exactly. You in a hurry?" "Just heading home." Carter finally looked at the ID. Daniel Reeves. The name meant nothing to him, but something else did. The address on the license didn't match the registration. His frown deepened. "You live here now?" Reeves didn't hesitate. "I move around a lot." Carter let out a short, quiet exhale. That wasn't an answer. That was a dodge. And dodging meant there was something to hide. His grip on the ID tightened slightly. He had seen this kind of confidence before, the kind that made his skin itch. "Step out of the vehicle." For the first time, Reeves hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. Then, without a word, he reached for the door handle and pushed it open. He was taller than Carter expected, broad shoulders, but still that same unsettling calm. "Hands where I can see them." Reeves complied. No resistance, no questions, just obedience. And Carter didn't like it. Carter took a step back, watching Reeves as he exited the vehicle. The night air was thick, humid. A faint breeze rustled through the nearby trees, but Carter barely noticed. His focus was locked on the man in front of him. Reeves stood tall, hands visible, movements slow and deliberate. Too controlled, too at ease. Carter didn't like that. "Turn around. Hands on the hood." Reeves hesitated, not out of defiance, out of something else, like he was tired of this routine. But after a brief moment, he complied, placing his hands firmly on the hood of the sedan. Carter stepped in close, closer than he needed to. He pressed a hand firmly on Reeves's back, keeping him in place as he began the search. His hands moved quickly over Reeves's jacket, then down his sides. You got anything on you I should know about? No. Carter's hands lingered longer than necessary, patting down every pocket, every seam. Reeves remained still, unfazed. That irritated Carter even more. You're pretty calm for someone being searched, Carter muttered. Should I be nervous? Carter clenched his jaw. The way he said it, so steady, so sure of himself. No fear, no desperation, just patience, like he was waiting for Carter to finish playing his little game. Carter stepped back, exhaling through his nose. Nothing. No weapons, no contraband, nothing he could use. Where were you coming from? Work. You work around here? I move around a lot. Carter scoffed. You said that already. He took another step back, running his tongue over his teeth. The street was quiet, no other cars passing by. It was just him and Reeves. What's in the trunk? Reeves turned his head slightly, just enough to meet Carter's gaze. Nothing illegal. Carter's hand twitched near his belt. He didn't like being tested. Pop it open. Reeves let out a slow breath, then nodded. He stepped away from the hood, moving toward the driver's side door. Carter followed closely behind, watching every movement. Reeves reached inside, pulled the lever. The trunk popped open with a soft click. Carter stepped forward, shining his flashlight into the darkness. A single duffel bag sat in the corner. Carter's stomach tightened. He'd been here before, a quiet suspect, an unassuming bag, and then drugs, weapons, something to justify his instincts. He looked at Reeves. The man's expression hadn't changed. Still calm, still waiting. Carter reached down and unzipped the bag, and then he froze. Carter's flashlight beam hovered over the contents of the duffel bag. He expected something. Drugs, a weapon, maybe a stack of unregistered cash. But what he saw made his grip on the light tighten. A police radio, a pair of handcuffs, a neatly folded tactical vest, and then the badge. For a moment, Carter didn't move. His breathing slowed, his pulse pounded in his ears. The silver emblem gleamed under the flashlight's glare. Daniel Reeves, Internal Affairs. Carter's throat went dry. His fingers twitched, hovering over the badge like it might burn him. Behind him, Reeves finally spoke. Something wrong, officer? Carter clenched his jaw. He forced himself to stand upright, to mask the sudden spike of panic clawing at his chest. You didn't mention you were a cop. Reeves let out a slow breath. Didn't seem relevant. Carter turned to face him, eyes sharp. Didn't seem relevant. He let out a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. You serious? Reeves shrugged, his face unreadable. It's a routine stop, right? Carter hated how steady his voice was, like he wasn't the least bit concerned about how this was playing out. Carter looked back at the badge, at the letters carved into the metal. Internal Affairs. You investigating something out here? Carter asked, trying to keep his voice level. Reeves didn't answer right away. He took a step closer, slow and deliberate. You tell me, he said. Carter's stomach churned. This wasn't just a routine stop anymore. This was a mistake, a big one. He squared his shoulders, trying to reclaim control. Step back, sir. Reeves didn't move. Why? Carter exhaled sharply. For my safety. Your safety? Reeves raised an eyebrow. I don't have a weapon. You just searched me, remember? Carter's hand hovered near his belt, near his holster. I don't like being tested. Reeves' expression remained unreadable. That's not my problem. The words cut deeper than they should have. Carter was used to compliance, to intimidation, working in his favor. But Reeves wasn't intimidated. He wasn't backing down, and Carter was running out of moves. His fingers twitched near his holster. Turn around and place your hands on the vehicle. Reeves' gaze didn't waver. Why? Because I said so. A tense silence stretched between them. The city's distant hum felt miles away. Reeves tilted his head slightly. You sure you want to do this? Carter's heart pounded. His grip on control was slipping. He could feel it, and Reeves knew it. Carter's fingers twitched near his holster, his mind racing. He needed to regain control. He needed to turn the situation around before it slipped completely from his grasp. Reeves didn't move, didn't argue, didn't resist. He just stood there, staring, waiting. I said, "Turn around and put your hands on the vehicle," Carter repeated, his voice sharper this time. Reeves exhaled slowly. "And I asked you why." Carter's jaw clenched. "Because I don't know what else you're hiding." Reeves let out a quiet chuckle. "That's funny," he said, "because I think you do." Carter felt heat rise to his face. He knew what Reeves was implying, and it pissed him off. "You're being uncooperative," Carter snapped. Reeves nodded slightly. "Uncooperative? Or just unwilling to play along?" Carter took a step forward. His hand hovered closer to his holster, the weight of his authority slipping through his fingers like sand. "I don't have time for this," Carter muttered. "Turn around now." Reeves remained still, watching him. Then slowly he shook his head. "No." Carter blinked. The air between them turned razor sharp. "What did you just say?" Reeves' voice was calm. Too calm. "I said no." Carter could feel his pulse in his throat. "You don't get to say no." Reeves took a step forward, closing the space between them, just enough to make Carter uneasy. "See, that's the problem," Reeves said. "You don't like it when someone doesn't just fall in line. You think that badge gives you the right to decide how this goes. But you're wrong." Carter swallowed hard, trying to keep his voice steady. "You're obstructing an investigation." Reeves arched an eyebrow. "What investigation, Officer Carter?" Carter opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Reeves took another step forward. "You thought I was just some guy in a beat-up car," Reeves continued. "Didn't matter that I wasn't doing anything wrong. Didn't matter that I was calm. You saw my face, my skin, and you decided I was a problem." Carter took a half step back. "You were looking for a reason," Reeves went on. "And when you didn't find one, you tried to make one." Carter's fingers clenched into a fist. "That's not true." Reeves let the silence stretch. Then finally he spoke. "You know what I do, right?" Carter swallowed. "Internal affairs." Reeves nodded. "That's right." His eyes locked onto Carter's. "I investigate officers like you." Carter felt like the ground had just cracked beneath his feet. He had pulled over the wrong man. Carter's throat felt dry. His mind raced, searching for a way to salvage the situation, but Reeves wasn't giving him an inch. "You got nothing to say now?" Reeves asked. His voice wasn't mocking, wasn't aggressive, just steady, unshaken. Carter forced himself to stand firm. "I was doing my job." Reeves exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "Your job?" He took a step closer, his eyes locked onto Carter's. "Your job is to protect and serve, not to profile and intimidate." Carter felt his jaw tighten, his grip on his belt stiffening. "I had probable cause." Reeves tilted his head. "Did you?" Carter tried to hold his gaze, but there was no conviction left in his words. "You saw a black man in an old car," Reeves continued. "That was all it took." Carter let out a slow breath through his nose. "You're twisting this." Reeves folded his arms. "Am I?" Silence. The weight of the moment pressed down on Carter like a boulder on his chest. "Let me tell you something, Officer Carter," Reeves said. "You're not the first cop to pull me over like this, and you won't be the last." Carter felt the sting of those words, but before he could speak, Reeves continued. "You were so sure I was hiding something, and when I didn't give you a reason to escalate, You pushed anyway, searching for anything to justify what you already believed. Carter's fingers twitched. He wanted to argue, to push back, but the truth sat between them, undeniable. You had a choice, Reeves said, to handle this the right way, but instead, you showed me exactly who you are. Carter swallowed hard. What happens now? Reeves studied him for a long moment. That depends. Carter blinked. On what? On whether you actually learn from this, Reeves said, or if you're just going to brush it off, blame me, and keep making the same mistakes. Carter clenched his teeth. A part of him wanted to argue, wanted to defend himself, but what could he say? Reeves let the silence stretch for another beat before stepping back toward his car. You're lucky tonight, he said, opening the driver's side door, because I'm not here to ruin your career, Officer Carter. Carter's breath hitched. He didn't move. But, Reeves added, meeting his gaze one last time, if I ever see you pull this same shit again, you won't be so lucky. He slid into his car, the engine humming to life. Carter stood frozen, watching as the sedan pulled away into the night. For the first time, he didn't feel in control. For the first time, he wasn't sure what came next. Carter stood motionless, staring at the darkened street where Reeves's car had disappeared. The distant hum of the city returned, the quiet of the night settling in again. But something had changed. The weight in his chest wasn't just frustration. It wasn't just anger. It was something heavier. He let out a slow breath and looked down at his hands. His fingers were still tense, the adrenaline not yet faded. His grip had hovered near his holster for far too long tonight. And for what? His radio crackled to life, cutting through the silence. Unit 23, report status. Carter swallowed hard, his mouth dry. His thumb hovered over the response button. For the first time in a long time, he didn't know what to say. His whole life, he'd seen himself as one of the good guys. But tonight, for the first time, he wondered if that was true. Reeves had walked away. He could have pushed harder, could have reported him, could have ended his career with one phone call. But he hadn't. Not yet. Carter exhaled, forcing himself to move. He stepped toward his patrol car, his boots heavy against the pavement. As he reached for the door handle, his reflection stared back at him in the side mirror. For the first time, he didn't recognize the man looking back. He slid into the driver's seat and shut the door. The familiar space didn't feel the same. The weight of his badge pressed against his chest. The radio crackled again. Unit 23, report status. Carter picked up the receiver, his fingers tightening around it. After a long pause, he pressed the button. All clear. His voice was steady, but he wasn't sure if he believed it. As he pulled away from the curb, the streetlights blurred in his peripheral vision. His mind replayed every second of the stop, every word, every choice. And for the first time in his career, he wasn't thinking about what the suspect had done wrong. He was thinking about himself. As the patrol car disappeared into the night, one thought lingered. Maybe this was just another traffic stop. Or maybe it was something more. Maybe it was the beginning of a reckoning.